Yeah, so now going on to another core component, which is the sequences. Right now, we see most of the rollups are using, and I think these are early times, most of the rollups are using centralized sequencer. So, like, a brief about what role a sequencer play in a rollup ecosystem, and how do you believe, um, sequencer are going to grow in terms of what kind of innovations you see going to happen in next 2 years?
Yeah, for sure. So a sequencer is effectively a piece of hardware which is connected to rollups that is almost like their operator. The sequencer is responsible for transaction ordering, batching transactions into blocks, and then passing them down to the data availability layer or Ethereum or Celestia, Avail, etc. And so the sequencer gives users what's called pre-confirmations for their transactions. And so this is kind of why transactions on rollups are so fast, because this centralized sequencer gives you a pre-confirmation of your transaction within 1 to 2 seconds. I think it's a 2-second block time. And then your transaction is through, and that sequencer goes in, orders those transactions into the block, and then goes and posts them down to the data availability layer, and then eventually to the L1. And so, yeah, right now there's a lot of like Arbitrum runs their own sequencer, Optimism runs their own sequencer, et cetera, et cetera. These sequencers generate a ton of revenue. So you can think of the revenue as basically the cost to run the hardware, which is pretty minimal when you compare to the total amount of fees that are charged on the network in terms of paying gas. And then the equation is basically you have the fees minus the hardware costs and minus the payment for Ethereum block space on the L1 for every block that you end up sequencing, batching, and posting down to the L1. And that's where you end up with your surplus. And so a lot of these sequencers have been making a ton of money, and have been doing things like retroactive grants and funding builders, and just have been revenue machines. And so I think that's kind of why there's this big desire for apps to go from apps on general purpose L2s to apps running their own app chains, because you can internalize this MEV, this MEV, this maximal extractable value, in terms of the sequencer surplus. You can control your transaction ordering to a certain extent, or at least have control of the sequencer, which does that, and then you kind of get this consistent revenue machine from the rollup itself if you have enough users and enough demand for block space. In the future, I think that we'll see kind of growth of these shared and decentralized sequencers, basically where we have this model of the shared sequencer basically can sequence transactions from multiple rollups at once, and they can come close to achieving what's known as atomic composability, where you can have a transaction on rollup A settle on rollup B at the same time in the same block. So you
Right.
could think of something like buy coin on transaction or on rollup A, and bridge it over to rollup B and stake it on rollup B, all within the same block. And so that's a pretty neat mechanism. But also I think that's like the bigger idea here is like decentralizing sequencers is going to create more censorship resistant rollup designs. Right now, if the SEC just told Arbitrum like shut it off, guys, like it would be problematic in the sense of like they would have to shut it off. There would be other kind of fallbacks happening, like Ethereum sequencing and base sequencing and things. But ultimately, I think the big push towards base sequencing, the big push towards decentralized and shared sequencers is a gradual push towards more censorship resistant and resilient designs, which is something that we're pretty excited about.